Okay. Uh, Over a 40-year career of being a landscape artist, I see myself now more as a landscape activist. Seems that my practice is squarely situated at the intersection of art and science. I'm more concerned with getting a message out into the public arena, like here today, than I am with getting an object into the marketplace. I've always been a die-hard liberal, a feminist, a child of the 60s, but it's only since about 2006 that I've found an organic way to bring my aesthetics together and in line with my politics. Threads of meaning, I think, appear throughout one's life. And for me, as an artist, I guess things like images of water, rivers, oceans, waterfalls, and mountains of ice and snow, they've been woven through about 40 years worth of my landscape work. In the 70s, I first used photos from mountain climbing books, alpine magazines, actually anything I could get a hold of to create a dramatic, large painting. In 2006, these visual threads came together with new meaning. This same painting from 1976 was shown in 2006, and that was my epiphany. I questioned what was happening with the snow. Is it still there? And that was the same year, you might remember, of Gore's Inconvenient Truth and Elizabeth Colbert's Notes on a Catastrophe. Global warming was definitely in the public dialogue. So I began educating myself and reading books, scouring the web for images, and communicating with glacial geologists. I also returned to sources that I used earlier. For some reason, I keep pressing. Okay, I guess I'm not pressing it hard enough. I returned to the sources that I used way back in the 70s. And at that point, they were sources. I hadn't gone to these places yet, and I was using books. And I decided to start with those sources. And slowly I evolved from this first project to evolve into a long, ongoing project called Politics of Snow. The challenge for me was how to transform concepts and ideas, graphs and symbols into my paintings without making them didactic. I love the idea of facts that we heard before versus feeling. And I was very much, in the crossroads of that. I wanted to get the message out, but I needed it to be subtle. I didn't want it to be didactic. Here are some recent installation shots to give you context of how I went about this. This one was the first Politics of Snow show in Philadelphia in 2010. I then had a second iteration in Princeton at the Woodrow Wilson School. After that, in 2012, there was an exhibition at the Michener Museum. And here you have an example of my using a map from about 1980 something from USGS. That's the white and blue painting. And then to your left, you have images of those same two glaciers from 2010, thanks to a friend named geologist Bruce Molnia. Here's another show actually that's still up now. I encourage everyone to come to Philadelphia to see this show at the Chemical Heritage Foundation. It's a group show where they've invited artists to deal with climate change. I think it's called Sensing Change, and it's a very big multimedia show with 3 panel videos. It's just a great show to see. I think it's up through June. My contribution was contrasting the local to the global photographs from where we live in Bucks County representing floods. And the bottom is Glacier National Park, which used to have about 150 glaciers. And I think maybe now it has about 30. Another show that actually is still up now, this is a one-person show at Zimmerle Art Museum in Rutgers, also called Glacial Perspectives. And this last show just opened, and thank you, JD, for mentioning it, at Tufts. And this one is about the Arctic. I hope these installation shots give you a sense of the various visual strategies that I've been struggling with, developing, and playing with these last 7 years. Repeats was the first one, because repeats was the most obvious way I could figure out how to talk about glacial change. And I had access so easily to images from the Ice and Data Center, from USGS, from scientists personally, because scientists have been measuring glaciers not just through ice cores, not just through data, but also by photographing them, and they call these repeats. They also would show and illustrate what was going on with recessional lines. So recessional lines was another way that I could use in combining with some other images. This is Columbia Glacier, thanks, by the way, to Tad Pfeffer, who became one of my collaborators. And the last kind of idea I had before my polar explorations was using Landsat Maps, because they're so abstract. If you don't see them in relationship to other things, you just think they're abstract paintings. So that's why we have an arrow in that one, sort of indicating map. So Landsat Maps were used as well. And these 3-4 examples obviously represent a lot more than I'm showing you today. So the more I researched, the more I saw ice as the indicator, because it's all about the glaciers. It's about the sea ice and ice sheets, which are rapidly melting at a record pace that can be measured, quantified, and modeled into the future as well as in the past. As my colleague said earlier, I love that sheet. That was just a wonderful piece of sculpture that talked about the ice cores. And I think we have to thank Ellen and Lonnie Thompson specifically for doing the research they've done. I'm thrilled to say that they actually came to visit my studio, and they're wonderful people. So water and ice were, for me, that's where I was at, okay? Everything led to that. I just realized, as we all do, what a pivotal role it plays in making our Earth livable. A world without ice just holds profound consequences for us as well as plant and animal habitats. And now we have Colbert's new book on the sixth extinction, which powerfully demonstrates that issue. 1/4 of Earth's population, 1.75 billion people, rely on glacier-fed rivers for life-sustaining water. I collaborated with David Brashears, who is a mountain climber and filmographer, who heads a foundation, aside from doing his own work, called Glacier Works, where he documents the rapid melt in the Himalayas. We met, and I met because I wanted images, and he liked my work and said, we should do something together aside from my giving you repeats. And he gave me this 1921 image of from George Mallory, where he had climbed the same mountain, made his own photograph in '07, and then challenged me to imagine the future. For 5 years, I gathered countless images as my network of scientist photographer collaborators grew. But this was really a reversal of my usual direct way to make art. My practice has been based as a landscape painter on figuring out where I want to go, figuring out how to get the grants to get there, and then going. Then, getting in the airplane or the helicopter, flying over, shooting film, and also walking on that terrain, and when possible, staying there, making paintings, making studies. Finally, this past year, 2013, I became bipolar. I hope no one's going to get offended by that, but really, I did visit opposite ends of the world, Antarctica and the Arctic Circle. And finally, I gathered firsthand knowledge, images, experiences from the most remote landscapes on our planet. The environment there was so distant, so unfamiliar and still. All was kind of enveloped in a magical aura of strange light, color, atmosphere. It just was so very magical, and especially was so in the South, in the Antarctic. A number of paintings from this experience resulted. And there weren't that many. Now I can't say, there are 40 more paintings from this series. No, there weren't. I did about 6 others, but this was the last one I did in August, and I called it Antarctica Quartet. Now, the reason there were so few, because I'm a person who paints a lot, was that I got back in February, and we were leaving in September for the Arctic Circle. And that took a lot of preparation because it was a very complex trip, logistically, monetarily. There was fundraising, et cetera. So that's the paintings that I've done from that series. I was going to the Arctic thanks to the arcticcircle.org nonprofit, where I was selected to be with 26 other artists. And we were going to be sailing in a three-masted barkentine around Svalbard. Svalbard is an archipelago, 10 degrees below the pole and 400 miles north of Norway. I wanted to find a way to fly over that same territory before embarking with the group. That's where all the complication and logistics and money came in. But I was able to do it, and I have really great gratitude to a man named Dr. Jack Kohler, a glaciologist from Norwegian Polar Institute. He got me there. We met in Longyearbyen, capital of Svalbard, and we flew to Ny-Ålesund. Ny-Ålesund is the most northern permanent research station in the world, and it's an international station with scientists. We met scientists from Italy and China and Korea. They were all there because it was the summer, and that's the best time to be there. Jack's mission was to gather data on mass balance. That's what he researches. And I was along for the ride, flying up Kronbreen and Kongsvigen Glacier. This was by far the most unique, exhilarating flying experience I've ever had. And I've had quite a few. I mean, I flew with Jim Turrell in 1977. I've been flying whenever I can in Cessnas and Heliocouriers and helicopters ever since. But that experience was always about getting up in the air, going where I wanted to go, telling him to tilt this way, tilt that way, shoot my shots, and then we go back. This was nothing like that. This was about flying up and landing and flying up and landing and flying up. And that's what we did all day long. So it was just absolutely amazing. Now, I've been in front of glaciers before in Alaska and Iceland, but I've never actually been on top of one. I mean, it's like being on top of the world. I've never walked on one with crampons where all around me was ice and sky. And it was an amazing, amazing feeling. And I think I have some amazing images to go with it, but I'm only sharing one because I'm only allowed to speak for 10 minutes. But I do invite you to go to my site, which I really just uploaded images from the Arctic this week from my photo site. But no more about that now. Knowing the facts about glaciers, that they form where snow and ice accumulate in sufficient quantities enough so that they start flowing down from the pressure. I understood all that. I've studied my geology. I understood about the weight and everything, but it's nothing like flying over these surging, moving crevasses. Now, you can't see them move. I mean, they are a little bit glacial, but they do move, and that's what they're measuring. They're measuring, especially in Svalbard, how quickly this surging is happening. Well, nothing was like that ever for me. And what I found happening in the 2 days that I flew with Jack and his crew, I found that, I'm a landscape photographer and painter, but I just couldn't photograph the landscape. And I really started photographing Jack and his colleagues as they were collecting their data throughout the day. I also videoed it as well, but I'm not doing that tonight. None of my readings could equal witnessing this research as I watched them collect these measurement of ices. They had weather stations and all sorts of stuff that they were collecting, all sorts of data that they brought their computers. There's Jack with his computer measuring, and they had brought all this stuff up there in April, in the spring, and then they come back 6 months later. Jack has been doing this since 2000, but he told me that studies on Kronbreen have been going on since about 1986. I went and learned more about the history of that after Ny-Ålesund because we were privileged enough to visit with archivists at the Norwegian Polar Institute headquarters in Tromsø, back down in Norway. And I spent hours looking at not only archival images, but also incredible old books in the library, in their rare book room. And this is one example of one that really caught my attention and captivated me because I had just been there. This is a 1990 image of Kronbreen. Well, I'm still processing these polar investigations of the past year, and the first series I'm working on is based on this historical image. And I only have one painting done. I would have had more done, But as JD's mentioned, I unfortunately broke my foot on December 9th. I mean, I had this painting just about done before I left, and I just finished up the type part last week. But yeah, I never did join JD. He was there, you should know, on a very important panel about how art communicates science at a convention called the AGU, the American Geophysical Union, which gathers a mere 23,000 earth scientists. I'm not kidding. Every year in San Francisco. So it's quite something. So, because of my convalescence and the fact that I couldn't jump around in my studio, I've spent many hours of uninterrupted concentration editing thousands of images from both poles. And I think I might be making a book about them. Not sure yet, but I have some fantasy pages and I'm only showing you the intro pages. The photos, again, are on my website, some of them. So I hope that sharing this journey with you brings some insight about my artistic process. I'm still collaborating with scientists more directly now than ever before. Next semester, I'll be at the University of Colorado Boulder as an InStar affiliate, where I'll present my projects, interact with researchers, ask them lots of questions. Because, I'm always asked, well, what's the difference between the North Pole and the South Pole? Well, I only have my anecdotal information, and it's very hard for me to give out facts before I really know if I'm right. So I need to talk to a lot more scientists. And I'll be gathering, of course, more visual data. I'm not exactly sure how this Odyssey year will play out in my future work, and I think that's another thing that we artists and scientists share, right? We play with things. We don't know when an idea is going to come to us, but we got lots of stuff coming at it. We look at a lot of stuff and things happen. But I do know that my process is like a scientist. I question, I learn, I experience. And I also know that I need to be connected to the world outside of my studio. And that way I know I'm just going to continue to work at the intersection of art and science. So who knows, what the next year will bring. Thank you very much.